On the night of April 15th, 2024, a grim silence hung over the southern neighborhoods of Chicago. It was the kind of silence that seemed to foreshadow something dark, something sinister brewing in the shadows. The Latin Kings, one of the most feared and organized gangs in the city, had been planning this night for weeks. Their goal was not just to kill, but to send a message to their rivals, to the community, and to their fellow gang members. It was about power, dominance, and the ruthless enforcement of order within their ranks. The night began like any other, with the city's streets slowly emptying as people retreated to the safety of their homes. But for the four gang members, this was the moment they had been preparing for. Their target was a fellow gang member who had become a liability, someone whose loyalty was in question. In the brutal world of the Latin Kings, such doubts were a death sentence. The planning phase had been meticulous. The gang members knew their target's routine inside out, where he went, who he met, and when he would be most vulnerable. Over the weeks leading up to the murder, they had carefully cultivated a false sense of security, interacting with him in a way that led him to believe he was safe, that he was still part of the inner circle. This was a crucial part of the plan. The victim needed to be caught off guard, his defenses down, his mind at ease. As the hour approached, the gang members positioned themselves strategically. The chosen location was a dark, narrow street in a part of the neighborhood where the gang's presence was strong and police patrols were infrequent. The area was perfect for what they were about to do. Isolated, with plenty of escape routes and few potential witnesses. The street lamps cast a dim, almost eerie light, creating deep shadows that provided cover for the assailants. Around 11:30 p.m., they lured the victim to the spot. He came willingly, unaware of the danger that awaited him. Perhaps he thought this was just another routine meeting, another night in the life of a gang member. But as he approached the street corner, the atmosphere shifted. The air was thick with tension, and the once familiar faces of his comrades now carried a deadly intent. The attack was sudden and vicious. One of the assailants moved behind the victim, grabbing his arms in a vice-like grip. The others drew their knives, the steel glinting briefly in the dim light before plunging into the victim's flesh. The first stab was followed by a flurry of blows, each delivered with lethal precision. The sound of the knives slicing through flesh and the dull thuds as they struck bone echoed in the night, mingling with the victim's muffled cries for help. The brutality of the attack was staggering. It wasn't just about killing, it was about making a statement. Each stab was a declaration of dominance, a message to anyone who might question the gang's authority. The victim, now crumpled on the ground, was barely recognizable, his body a canvas of violence, a testament to the merciless nature of gang warfare. As quickly as it began, the assault was over. The attackers, their task complete, wasted no time. They fled the scene, disappearing into the shadows from which they had emerged. Their destination was a nearby safe house, a place where they could regroup and celebrate their grim success. This house, like many others in the area, was a fortress for the gang, a place where they conducted their operations and planned their next moves. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with adrenaline and a dark sense of triumph. The murder was not just an act of violence, it was a ritual, a rite of passage that solidified their standing within the gang. The other members, who had not participated in the killing but were nonetheless complicit, greeted them as heroes. There was no remorse, no hesitation, only the cold satisfaction of having eliminated a threat and strengthened their position within the gang's hierarchy. Meanwhile, the neighborhood outside remained eerily quiet, unaware of the horror that had just unfolded. But by the time the first rays of dawn began to break, the scene of the crime was a different place altogether. Law enforcement arrived at the location, their presence heralded by the flashing lights of police cars and the sound of sirens cutting through the early morning silence. The scene that greeted them was one of unspeakable violence, a bloodied body lying in the street, evidence of the night's savage events. Detectives cordoned off the area, carefully collecting evidence. They scoured the street for clues, footprints, discarded weapons, anything that might lead them to the killers. Surveillance cameras in the vicinity were quickly accessed, and the footage they captured would prove invaluable in piecing together the events of the night. The grainy images showed the victim arriving at the scene, the sudden attack, and the assailants fleeing into the night. These images, though not crystal clear, were enough to give the investigators a starting point. Witnesses were few, but those who had seen or heard anything were questioned extensively. Most were reluctant to speak, fearing retaliation from the gang. This code of silence, enforced by fear, was another obstacle for the investigators, one that they had encountered many times before in cases involving gang violence. Despite this, the detectives pressed on, knowing that even the smallest piece of information could be crucial in solving the case. As the investigation continued into the following weeks, the pressure on law enforcement mounted. The brutality of the crime had shocked even those accustomed to the violence of gang life, and there was a growing demand for justice from the community and local leaders. The police worked tirelessly, following every lead, analyzing every piece of evidence, determined to bring the perpetrators to justice. By May, their efforts paid off. The combined work of the Chicago Police Department and the FBI led to the identification and eventual capture of the suspects. The arrests were a significant victory for law enforcement, but the battle against gang violence in Chicago was far from over. This case was just one of many, a symptom of the larger problem of organized crime that continued to plague the city.